We all learn a different way of getting our needs met from the different adults around us. So if you're in a kind of stereotypical family and your mom is more nurturing and your dad is more, rugged, then when you slip and fall with mom, the tears are going to come out because that's how you get the hug. If you slip and fall in front of your dad and you get up and keep playing, your dad goes, yeah, well done, you're so tough. And we tend to respond very much to those rewards and they carve our personalities. But when you add food to that combination, it becomes pretty serious. So now the child falls, skins their knee, and they're crying, and the parent, wanting to do anything they can to eliminate the pain, grabs you an ice cream or a cookie. And all of a sudden, in a Pavlovian sense, you link up the love that you're getting with that flavor, with that smell and that texture. Mm-hmm. And then in a biochemical sense, you're getting a bunch of serotonin and dopamine rewarding you for falling down. And you wonder why that kid just gets clumsier and clumsier. Well, you keep rewarding them being clumsy.
Welcome to the Dr. Espen podcast. I am Espen. Today I'm joined by Eric Edmeades. This is going to be a great conversation around health and how to take our life to the next level. Eric is a recognized, powerful and engaging, entertaining speaker. He's shared the stage with many incredible speakers such as Sir Richard Branson, Jack Canfield, John Gray, Robin Sharma, and former President Bill Clinton, among many others. He's logged over 10,000 hours on stage. So he's got extensive experience in speaking in over 20 countries around the world. He's also one of the true pioneers in what's referred to as the coming food revolution. I want you to stay tuned for this conversation because this is a really important conversation. For me, also as a physician, I've seen this over and over again where people have neglected some small but very important things in their health, in their lifestyle, in their food, etc. And this leads to and can lead to major consequences down the track. So if you want to understand your body and how to get the most out of energy and live a healthy, beautiful life, this is going to be a worthwhile conversation. Eric is so truly passionate about helping human beings achieve and experience outstanding health. So today we'll talk about anything from what does it mean to apply these transformative healthcare or health practices, breaking free from the limitations, and also the psychology behind relationships and many other things. So I want to say, Eric, special welcome. How are you?
I'm really good. Thanks for having me. We're going to have fun.
Yeah, this is going to be great. You're joining us all the way from, you were mentioning, do you want to share this with our clients?
Dominican Republic.
It's so beautiful over there, I would imagine.
Yeah. It's I live on Kite Beach, and the entire town is basically built around windsurfing and kiteboarding and yoga. So it's a pretty special place.
Oh, sounds horrible. Okay. Can you tell us, Eric, about transformative health practices and a sustainable lifestyle change? What is it in the way you teach it? And I'm interested in this because I know you've been invited to speak on major stages around the world on these topics. And I want to know what is, in your eyes, a transformative healthcare practice and how to apply that in our lives.
Well, I think, maybe a great place to start is what isn't particularly transformative or positively transformative. And that is the average diet or the average doctor's advice. I don't mean that with any malicious intent. I don't think anybody out there is intentionally trying to cause a problem. But, the average diet, let's say, even if the diet was accurate, which that's a big stretch anyway, but let's say that it was nutritionally on point and what have you, the information is given to the consumer in a way that can only be observed as destructive. It can only be observed as look, if you're an alien from another planet trying to evaluate what diets are for, you would have to deduce that diets are primarily for reducing the self-esteem of the people who do them. It's like, I'm going to give you a bunch of impossible rules. I'm going to force you to starve yourself. I'm going to ask you to do all kinds of food accounting and calories. I'm going to get you to do a bunch of strenuous exercise while you're frankly malnourished. And you're going to last on that for about 6 or 7 days. Then I'm going to shame you for not having enough willpower to stick to the plan that I gave you. And I'm going to blame you for getting overweight and developing a lifestyle disease and what have you. And that's basically what's going on. And so when I decided to make a foray into this space, I really did it because I'd had a huge health turnaround of my own, and a bunch of my friends asked me how I did it. And so I started trying to help them, and I found the same thing. I'm giving them what I happened to know was very good information, but they wouldn't stick with it. And so I then started doing the deep dive into behavioral psychology and what really stimulates lasting change for people. And so we developed something called behavioral change dynamics, and we build all of our courses on that structure, which is why they're sticky and why they're transformative, why they're effective. We're basically here to say nobody should ever go on a diet ever again.
So Eric, this is awesome. I really love this. And I know from experience that a lot of people in the past have tried diets and they didn't work. And speaking from experience in this regard, I think a lot of people could relate to, I want to change my life, but I have not been able to do it long term. Okay, so what are some of the things that you've seen really work the best when it comes to, one, I've got the intention to change my life and revolutionize my health and get healthy and stay healthy, but maybe they have been unable to do so. What would be some advice for those people?
Well, one thing has to do with rock bottom. Rock bottom is the place of either death or transformation. If we talk about it in alcohol terms, it's a little more obvious. If somebody drinks themselves into a stupor on a regular basis and they blow up their marriage and they blow up their business and they blow up their job and they blow up their relationships, then they hit rock bottom and they either die at that point or maybe they pull up out of the dive and they find sobriety and they change their lives. And I would say that there's a similar thing going on relative to the where we are with health. The problem is that food takes you to a much more dangerous rock bottom even than alcohol. The rock bottom from alcohol, comparing the levels of dangerousness maybe doesn't really work, except for one thing, and that is that somebody can hit a relative rock bottom with alcohol. They can bounce and recover. Somebody who's hit a rock bottom with food likely has permanent damage created by long-term diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and what have you. So one of the things that we find really effective is to associate people to rock bottom way ahead of time. And that is to try to find a way to help them to get to that rock bottom. But then even more motivating that is we use a system of what we call success tableaus. And the idea of a success tableau is recognizing that beyond having a particular goal for something, there is a moment in the achievement of any particular goal or any particular outcome that has an emotional engagement that can draw you to it. So, for example, I can be talking to one of my clients and say, well, why do you want to turn your health around? Well, I want to feel better. I probably want to live longer. I don't really want to be on medication. Those are all, true, but they're not particularly emotive. But if I do a really good job, I'm going to find a particular moment. And this is a real life case. I was working with one of my clients and I was like describing, okay, so what do you really want? And he goes, you know what I really want? I want to be able to get on the floor and play with my grandchildren and then stand back up again without having to ask for help because I don't have pain in my knees anymore. Oh, okay. That's a moment. And so now, if you can imagine, once you've really locked onto that particular moment, the next time that person's making a food decision and they see that food decision is going to block that moment from transpiring, from taking place, that can help increase what we call Frankel moments, or a moment of clarity during which people can bring consciousness to the conversation.
Spot on. To what point in your practice, and having helped a lot of people now, do you find that emotional wounding or troubles with equilibrating or feeling good, to what point is that the cause, would you say, of a lot of behavioral stuff when it comes to the way people eat and drink?
It's absolutely significant. There's no question. I think before we go there, there's a very important thing to understand. And that is that, if anybody's listening or watching right now or, whatever, I want to say this, that if you're overweight or you're, say you're on the diabetic spectrum and approaching type 2 diabetes or dealing with it, or you've got some other quote lifestyle condition, what I really want to say is that it's not your fault. And I think that's an incredibly important distinction because, of course, in our current world, when we see somebody who's a little bit overweight, when we see somebody who's, type 2 diabetic or what have you, the approach we tend to take with them is like, well, if you just ate better, if you just worked out more, you'd be better off. And while there may be some truth to that, the reality is that our education system's been hijacked, our legislation system's been hijacked, and most of us are confused. 1 minute, the Daily Mail is running an article saying that eggs are bad for you and cause diabetes, and the next minute they're running an article saying eating eggs will prevent diabetes. And then you wonder why the average consumer is confused. So you've got that going on in the background. Now you get into the emotional wounding things that you're asking about, and it's really significant. Some of it is obvious and overt, like a little boy running along falls, on the sidewalk and skins his knee. We all have seen this happen where the child, looks up, and if mommy is watching, then the child may well cry. If daddy or somebody else is watching, the child might just get up and dust themselves off, right? Because we all learn a different way of getting our needs met from the different adults around us. So if you're in a kind of stereotypical family and your mom is more nurturing and your dad is more, rugged, then when you slip and fall with mom, the tears are going to come out because that's how you get the hug. If you slip and fall in front of your dad and you get up and keep playing, your dad, yeah, well done, you're so tough. And we tend to respond very much to those rewards, and they carve our personalities. But when you add food to that combination, it becomes pretty serious. So now the child falls, skins their knee, and they're crying, and the parent, wanting to do anything they can to eliminate the pain, grabs you an ice cream or a cookie. And all of a sudden, in a Pavlovian sense, you link up the love that you're getting with that flavor, with that smell and that texture. Mm-hmm. And then in a biochemical sense, you're getting a bunch of serotonin and dopamine rewarding you for falling down. And you wonder why that kid just gets clumsier and clumsier. Well, you keep rewarding them being clumsy. And then you wonder why that same person at 45 years old is driving down the freeway, having had a shit day at work, and they pull into the drive-thru and grab themselves a Dairy Queen Blizzard. And so there's no question that our traumas and our pain and our emotional wounds that have developed through our lives have a relationship to food. And so again, one of the things that we do with clients is, we like to poll people. So we often have classes with, several hundred or several thousand people in them. And so those polls can be kind of fun. So I asked the other day, it's like, tell me what cures chocolate. Sorry, I gave it away. Tell me what cures depression. Well, you can guess 70% of the people wrote chocolate, right? Like that's what happens. And then I go, all right, well, now tell me what cures loneliness. It turns out chocolate's pretty big on that one too. But now ice cream and wine, those are big ones for loneliness. And then I said, hang on a second now. You're lonely, so you're going to go to the freezer and get an ice cream. And so you're going to stop feeling lonely. Only then you're going to eat the ice cream, and you're going to be even more alone at the end of that than you were in the first place. All that food is really doing is distracting you from the emotional pain you have. It's not actually curing it. And so now we wonder why people binge, and well, we don't have to wonder, we know why. So there's a very big solution in this, and that is to identify alternate ways to solve that emotional problem that don't involve dysfunctional foods.
I love the word dysfunctional foods. This is huge. And, there are a lot of food-like products on the market that aren't foods, and we call them foods.
Oh, yeah.
And I agree with you. It's just so sad for me. I used to be a physical education teacher, and I used to teach in schools, and I used to see and I still refer to this today in my 40s as child abuse, when parents are unconsciously of course, with good intent, they want to care for them and love them, and they think that giving them an ice cream once they've fallen over is the great way to do it. But then they don't realize that they're linking serotonin from an ice cream to that of, hey, when I'm in pain, I eat. Now from this conversation, we have a broader spectrum of awareness. However, as I was mentioning, I've realized this, and I've seen this with a lot of parents, how they are unhealthy, so they unconsciously then pass on their habits of eating, shit food-like products, jam-packed with additives and preservatives and you name it, artificial sweeteners and colors and whatever, thinking that that's okay. And then the child then has the habit, and the child then becomes overweight, which is, again, what I refer to as child abuse. And then they get older, and then now they ingrained these patterns in their life. And as you mentioned beautifully, Eric, it's not their fault. They've been conditioned to believe that this is an actual food. How do we change that in our generations? How do we change that right now? From the parents out there like me that are watching, listening, going, because I'm a parent and I know how hard it is to get the younger ones to eat healthy, but we are on a regime that is spot on. We'll have, pancakes on a Saturday and maybe some, a little bit of a lolly on the Sunday, but Monday to Friday, we are, I wouldn't say strict, I would say really conscious about what the food does for the body, not just its flavor or its texture. What are your thoughts?
Well, clearly something I've thought a lot about. Of course, most of my work these days is repairing the relationship people have with food. But of course, very often our clients are kids and or parents. So we have to get into the prevention version of this as well, psychologically. So I would put it in phases. Child abuse is a pretty strong term, but I got to tell you this, that if you're eating lot of processed garbage and hot burning sugars and stuff while you're in the conception phase of having children. That is to say, preconception for the man or the woman, or post-conception for the woman. You are making an epigenetic reality for your child. So the child abuse has already begun. And I've never really referred to it as child abuse because it's kind of a harsh thing to say, but if you think about it, that child is going to be born with a metabolism that is predisposed to gaining weight and predisposed to preferring sugar, because if you now you've got the baby. And so what I would say is the first step is when dealing with conception, everybody should go through a really clean nutrition period and metabolic balance period so that they epigenetically arm their children as best possible. Then the next phase is, what do you do with the child from 0 to 2? Well, I would say from 0 to 2, even to 3, don't give them that shit. Like I'm blown away when I see people giving their 2-year-old ice cream. Like the child doesn't even know what it is. It's like, there's a reason we don't let children use drugs and alcohol before they get to a certain level of consciousness. And that's because they're supposed to have some level of consequence assessment. Well, when you're 2, you don't. And so I was sitting with a friend some months ago, and we're sitting at the table with his 4-year-old, and he orders a Coke, which shocked me anyway. I didn't know people actually drank that anymore. And then his 4-year-old sitting there, and he goes, "What's that, Daddy?" And he goes, "Oh, it's a Coke." And the kid doesn't want to try it, because like kids at 4 don't like new things. And he convinced his child to try it. Like, come on, give it a go. I'm sure you'll like it. And he convinced him to do it. Now, I think that holding your children off those things as long as possible is incredibly productive and is what should be done. But now you're going to enter the next phase. And the next phase is they get to 4 and 5 and 6. And now they're facing those things because you can't control it all anymore. They're going to school, they're going to preschools, and they're going to parties and what have you. So now you move to the next level. And that is, I do not believe that it helps to be restrictive at this point. It doesn't help to say no. If you say no, then the child's going to find another way. If you say, well, no, you can't have it, then guess what? They're going to go to a friend's house and have it anyway. Instead, at this point, I think it's really productive to be working on education. And what I mean by education is that if you help a child to spot patterns, like, hey, you can have that cake if you really want, and the soft drink if you really want it. I just want to remind you, the last time that happened, remember, you had that big meltdown because sometimes sugar causes that in people. Now, go ahead and have it. Now the child is going to have it, and what you should hope is they have a double portion, because what you're hoping is that they will have that meltdown later, because the child will then assess the consequence more accurately. And it'll really get to the point. I remember one day this parent walking up to me going, "How did you do that?" And I said, "Do what?" "We had a birthday party and we were offering candies, and your daughter came along and asked if it was good or bad sugar, and we had to tell her it was bad sugar, and then she asked if we had apples." Well, now you're in a very important stage, and the best way I can say this is that all children, all of us, were born with chemical reward systems for rebellion. We are designed to become independent. From the first time, sometime around 18 months or so, maybe even earlier than that, you're feeding your child and they push the spoon away and they want to hold the spoon themselves. And it doesn't matter that they get the food in their eyes. It doesn't matter that they stick the food in their ear. They want control. Right? And in that moment, they want that control. That is this inborn desire to rebel. And the fact is that children have to have that in order to become independent human beings. But there comes a point at around about 11 where you have a very special moment. And that moment is, are you going to continue to be what they rebel against, or are you going to join their rebellion? And so what I mean by that is, if you think that the 2 or 3 or 4-year-old, they're rebelling against you because you're all they've got. And you don't really want them rebelling against their teachers too much if you can help it. So you're the one that they're going to rebel against. But there comes this point where at around about 11, that rebellion is going to start to get quite powerful. And if you play it wrong, you're going to have a massive teenage rebellion. And then your kids are going to eat whatever they want. They're going to start vaping. You're going to have no alignment. So what I would suggest is, knowing that those children need to rebel, there's no point trying to stop them rebelling. But what you can do is realign the rebellion. And so how do you realign the rebellion? Well, you go, hey, I don't know if you know this, but the Coke that you just had, do you know that there's a lot of salt in that? I don't taste any salt. No, you don't taste the salt. The salt is in there to make you thirsty, so you buy another Coke because they want your money. So now they have to put all this sugar in there to hide the salt. They're just trying to manipulate you to increase their profits. And the kids are like, what? Yeah, and on top of that, they put the caffeine in there to give you this boost of energy, but then you're going to get addicted to the caffeine. And so slowly the kids are going, holy shit, that's who I should be rebelling against, right? So it's like not preachy, informative, and you help them link consequence. And same thing with vaping. If you forbid your children from vaping, they're going to vape. If on the other hand, I'll tell you where I really got this from. I've sort of made it my own in terms of the way I describe it now. But the original inspiration of this idea came to me from Paul McCartney. And I saw this interview with him many years ago. And the interviewer said, listen, Paul, it must have been tough for you to be a parent because all of your drug use and your sex escapades and all that stuff was so written about that you can't hide it from your children. I mean, the rest of us, we can pretend those things didn't happen. And Paul said, that didn't make parenting hard. It made it easier because I wasn't tempted to lie. In other words, my children knew the shit that I did, and therefore they are willing to talk to me about it. Wow. Massive breakthrough. In other words, he joined their rebellion. Hey, kids, listen, if there's something you want to know about sex, trucks, and rock and roll, I'm Paul McCartney. I can tell you all about it. And so guess what? The kids, and one of my favorite moments as a parent to my eldest son is at 15 or so years old. He called me one night to tell me that he and his buddies were probably going to go out drinking. They were at a summer camp in Germany. And he asked me, how many do you think is safe for me to have? And what do I do? And all this kind of stuff. That's a really great call to get to have. Most parents don't get to have that call. They find out that their kids are drinking sometimes years after and sometimes in pretty awful ways.
Oh, beautiful. I love this. Either rebel with them or they rebel against you. I totally see that in that time frame. Okay, so let's say the average person, and I say this, we're overfed and undernourished. I have seen this over many years, and I'm generalizing. For most people, that may, of course, not be accurate. But what I think we can agree on, people listening, watching, and tuning in right now, is that there's a fair bit of things in our reality that we're eating that we should not be eating, or drinking that we should not be drinking. So the first thing is, Eric so beautifully spoke to before, is, okay, what's the emotion behind it? If it's loneliness, chocolate and ice cream's not going to cure the problem. It may give you a temporary serotonin dopamine hit, make you feel better, to have an even worse crash later. So then consider firstly, what is the emotion or the wound or the trauma, behind it. Okay. Then we've talked about the different stages here of what happens to children. And I was bold enough to use the word child abuse. And I meant this in a loving way, but I must say, it has been challenging to observe a lot of parents and the way they feed their children, and they don't know that they're creating something that's going to lead or can lead to major health issues later in life. So let's take that next stage then, Eric. Here we have the young adult or the adult in general, and now they're pre-diabetic, and now their metabolism shot, and or even earlier in that stage because of the way that they ate, because they picked up the patterns of the parents. So it was okay to have processed bread and processed this and processed that. Their metabolism, because it's so high in, processed stuff and sugars, is shot. By the time they're in their 20s, they struggle to lose weight because their hormones are out of whack and they're highly toxic, biologically, and so on and so forth. And then they're pre-diabetic. And I know you specialize a lot in helping people, in that stage, and also in the stage where they get to, hey, holy smokes, I'm diabetic. This is dangerous. What does a person do if they find themselves in that situation? They're either pre-diabetic or they're diabetic, or even more common, they're burning sugar 24/7 as the primary fuel. They're not in ketosis. Their metabolism is off. What would you say to those people?
Well, I mean, it is most people, unfortunately, these days. I think it's fairly safe to say that 7 out of 10 Americans are somewhere on that diabetic spectrum. And I doubt it's very different in your country for that matter, and certainly not around the world. And so, I think we can fall back to one really important principle, and that is that if you really, truly want to solve a problem, the first thing you have to do is understand the problem. And looking at the advice that the various diabetic associations around the world are offering, they clearly don't understand the problem. In fact, I think it's fair to say that they don't even want to understand the problem, because largely they're funded by the pharmaceutical industry that profits from the disease. So you have a huge conflict of interest thing going on there. So if we step out of all that, because we're not in there, and we can take a look and say, well, where's this disease coming from? Well, look, if somebody gets Ebola, we know it came from the virus, and that's the cause of it. But when somebody gets a disease like diabetes, we have to ask ourselves, where did it come from? In the case of type 2 diabetes, well, it's generally accepted at this point that it's a lifestyle disease. And that is the first major problem. I think it's absolutely disgusting to call it a lifestyle disease. It is a truly disgusting thing to call it, because calling it a lifestyle disease is about shifting the blame from the food manufacturers onto the consumer. And I believe that was done very intentionally by food and tobacco companies in order to, in a sense, jury tamper with the overall jury pool. In other words, you've got all these people who might one day be on a jury where somebody's suing a tobacco company or suing a food company. And if you can put out into society the idea that a lifestyle disease was the consumer's fault, that's going to affect the way they find in a case. So they've done a very good job of moving the blame onto the diabetic, or onto the obese person, or onto the person with lung cancer, or whatever the case might be. So that's where I first come back to what we said earlier. It is not your fault. If somebody is diabetic, type 1, clearly even more so. But in the case of type 2 and prediabetes, it is not that person's fault, but it is their responsibility to turn it around. And because nobody else is going to care as much as they are about turning around. Step number one in this, and this is very important, is the average person has no idea how serious diabetes really is. They kind of find out from their doctor, oh, I'm pre-diabetic. I don't really know what that means. I guess I eat too much sugar. My doctor says if I cut down the sugar, maybe I won't become a type 2 diabetic. And then some months or years later, they go, oh, now you're type 2 diabetic, but here's your metformin, or here's your insulin, or whatever pharmaceutical intervention we're going to use in each case. And what's interesting is that they for the most part, people don't recognize that diabetes is, frankly, one of the most severe health conditions on the planet. It is absolutely terrible. I mean, you're talking about sticky blood that's causing or causing circulatory problems. They're going to result in the amputation of fingers and toes and hands and feet. It means losing your eyesight very, very soon. It's the number one risk factor for the development of most cancers and heart disease, for that matter. It's completely immunosuppressant. I mean, the number one way to get killed by COVID-19 was to be obese or diabetic. These are very dangerous diseases, but we don't learn about them that way. We learn about them like, oh, well, if you ate a little better, it would be better. But instead, you could just take this pill. And that's where we go. So understanding that's the first problem, is that most people don't recognize how serious it is. Then we go to, let's understand the actual problem. How did it happen? And what I'm going to suggest about diabetes, and we suggest this in our book, Post-Diabetic, is that we stop regarding type 2 diabetes as a chronic disease that must be managed for life. And we rather look at it like a repetitive stress disorder that will go away when you fix the imbalance. And so what is the imbalance? Well, I would argue that the imbalance is that human beings evolved three very distinct metabolic functions, metabolic modes. We burn fat, we burn sugar, we burn protein, and we're supposed to burn those various fuels depending on the environmental conditions given the time of year and what have you. And so what has happened is that first with the advent of agriculture, and then of course with the acceleration of processed foods and sugars and what have you, we have eliminated seasons. And so the average person is stuck in the metabolic mode of preparing for winter. So they're either storing a lot of fat or developing insulin sensitivity and boosting their carb cravings, and they're developing diabetes or obesity. And that is a function of being stuck in the wrong season. Once you begin to understand that, you recognize, well, wait a second, what if we were able to push the body into the counterbalancing season? Well, here's the magic. It takes some 10 or 20 or 30 years, depending on your lifestyle, to manifest type 2 diabetes. It takes about 8 weeks to reverse it. What that says to me is the entire time that somebody was eating all these processed foods and carbohydrate foods, the body was resisting diabetes with all its might. It was doing everything it could. And it's like, if you could just tip the scale back in my favor a little bit, we wouldn't have to become diabetic. And the proof of that is we can turn it around in the vast majority of cases in 6 to 8 weeks.
Phenomenal. Good health makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make a lot of dollars, hey? And we know, without getting too conspiracy minded here, that there are
Yeah, no kidding.
massive vested interests around the world where people are getting conditioned, manipulated, tricked to eat shit foods because it makes so much money.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you know, if we had someone like you in politics, not that that's probably going to be fun, but imagine if we taxed high sugar, high processed foods and we started changing the system and actually educating people in a way where they became aware. If you were to drop some nuggets here, what would you say are the must knows right now for any individual out there when it comes to lifestyle choices and actually getting your health to a point where you will be vibrant, happy, alive, and well?
I guess I would start with this, that the diet industry and the food industry and the food science industries are, they're lost. There's no getting them back. The food industry is entirely predicated on profitability. You have a bunch of food companies that don't give a damn about you being nourished. They just care about their profits. And I'm not saying there's any one evil person working in Nabisco. I'm just saying that the current profit model they're set up with is not about health. It's about profitability. And then you move on to the food sciences. And the food sciences, well, they've just been hijacked. Anytime somebody says, well, you should follow the science, what they're really saying is you should follow the money. Yeah. Because science requires money. And if you, for example, were at a university and you're managing the fund for research, and you had enough money for one last study, and the one study was, well, we'd like to, I think this is from Harari, but he said, something like, if you'd like to run a study that measures the hormonal stress impact on a female cow from taking its calf away and how that affects its well-being and even the quality of its milk. That's one study. And the other study is the study of introducing exogenous hormones into a female cow in order to boost its milk supply. Well, which study gets the money? Clearly the second one, because there's an ROI. And so when you begin to recognize that all food science has been hijacked, and then the other thing with food science is it's not actually possible really to do proper double-blind food studies. It's just not really possible ethically, because in order to do that, what you would have to do is take a group of people and control every aspect of their life and flex only the one thing you wanted to test. That means they'd have to sleep in the same house, eat exactly the same foods, walk the same. I mean, it's just not possible. And so, today we're in a place where the food science can't be trusted. The food industry certainly can't be trusted. And the diet industry certainly can't be trusted. So we have to take a different view. And there's one view that you can take that basically fixes the entire thing. And that is any fad, any nutritional principle, any idea in the nutrition space that violates what we know about evolutionary biology must immediately be considered suspect. It doesn't mean that it's wrong, but you should certainly not accept it as categorically right. If it violates evolutionary biology, it's probably wrong, or it should at least be suspect. And I'll give you a good example. Anybody who comes along and says, oh, avocados are essential, you definitely should be eating all your avocados. Listen, I think avocados are great. I think it's great, healthy fats full of folic acid. I think they are good for us. But the fact that they're good for us is an accident. It is an accident. And the reason that I say that is that the first time any of us ate an avocado was in the last 200 years. They come from the Americas. We never had them. Humans grew up without them. Therefore, anybody who says that an avocado is an essential item is wrong. We clearly survived this long without them. Now, that doesn't mean they're bad for us. It just means that whatever study somebody wrote to show that they're essential isn't accurate. Conversely, I would argue that many of the other plants that come from the Americas, like the nightshades and what have you, are generally speaking not good for us because they've been so newly introduced to us that we're not that good at digesting them.
And then you have the separate topic of, yeah, that's great. Let's talk about the avocado or the banana or the apple. But we're not eating an apple. We're eating an apple that has been genetically modified, sprayed with shit, stuck on a shelf. And when you're eating it, yeah, exactly. And now you're eating something that you think is healthy and may be nutrients in there, significantly less than the average, organic apple, for example. But at the same time, full of the stuff that bioaccumulates in the body and makes us sick over time. So I know this is a big conversation. It's a triggering conversation, but it's a freaking important one because, as I say, the body is the only place the spirit gets to live. And if you don't take care of it, well, what happens? Well, I saw this in my clinics, right? I had a franchise of health clinics from medical doctors and chiropractors and naturopaths and nurses and you name it. And we saw this over and over again. The standard thing, I mean, we'd survey 100 and test case studies with 100 patients. And, 90+% of them were deficient in, vitamin D and zinc and magnesium. And it just, it's everywhere. So where does one go to find out, hang on, what's going on with my body? Because I always say to see is to know, not to see is to guess. How do you know if you're healthy? Holy smokes. I used to ask that of my patients. How do you know if you're healthy? And they used to tell me, well, I don't have any symptoms. I don't smoke and I don't drink. So I guess I must be healthy. So then the question is, does the absence of symptoms mean that you're healthy? You can be not just pre-diabetic, but you can be diabetic and still have no symptoms that you can feel. So how do we go about it? I mean, would you say, Eric, that firstly, it's about making a decision and then getting tests done, getting a coach or a mentor like yourself. If someone realizes that, okay, I'm triggered by this conversation, but it's because it's important to me and I need to change my health. What do we do then? What actions do we take to really take our health to the next level?
Well, I think symptom observation is important, but then what we have to do is move the line, the quality assurance line. Like, symptoms might include things like I have pain or I'm sick regularly or what have you. But symptoms also include I need a coffee just to be alive in the morning. I am tired at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't have, I find my memory gapping on me at, more than it should. And all of those things are early stage symptoms that people should be alarmed by. Like, it is not natural to feel dozy at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and need a chocolate bar or a coffee to get yourself back to life. So I think symptom spotting is definitely a good idea. I think the other one is just to look at the genuine reality of how you feel. Do you feel alive? Do you wake up in the morning with passion? Are you ready? Are you running full cylinders throughout the day? Are you coming to the end of the night and going, wow, I feel used up, and dropping straight off to sleep in the nicest possible way? And if that's a consistent lifestyle for you and you've got some exercise and you're getting sun and you're symptom free, well, yeah, I'd say you're probably, the odds are you're probably at least minimally healthy and maybe maximally so. But you're absolutely right. There are many conditions that are lying under the surface. And I think at this point, the testing capacity is really, really good. Naveen Jain, I don't know if you're familiar with Biome. He's a good friend of mine. And we just spent the week with him now at his place on Mosquito. And we had lots of interesting conversations about this. And, of course, they have their testing protocols to do epigenetic testing and so forth that can help you identify where you're at in a certain level. We were just recently talking to a food science guy about another epigenetic test that they can do that can basically pre-spot most stage 1 cancers really, really early. And so, we know that early detection of these things is useful. So I think most people that are kind of approaching their 40s and 50s should be contemplating those things. But at the core, the real problem we're dealing with is misinformation. The real problem we're dealing with is nutritional confusion. It's like bread is good, bread is bad. Alcohol is good, alcohol is bad. Meat is good, meat is bad. And why they do that to us, there's two really good reasons they do that to us. The one is that with cognitive dissonance comes a lack of decision-making capacity. So if I confuse the shit out of you about food, then you're just going to eat what I tell you to eat. And that's just the way that's going to be. And of course, the other reason for confusing us about food is that the food manufacturers, are battling for their percentage of our plate. And so as the protein people are trying to take some from the carb people, and the carb people are trying to get it from the fat people, and they're all fighting with each other. And so one minute they're producing something talking about how good their food is. Meanwhile, one of their competitors is running an article about how bad that food is. You go to the Daily Mail, literally 1 year apart, they have an article talking about eggs causing diabetes, which was a totally dishonest article. It wasn't the case at all. In fact, diving deep into that study, what really turned out is that the women in that study didn't like eggs, so they didn't eat their eggs as eggs. They ate their eggs as pancakes and muffins. And guess what? That caused an uptick of blood sugar, which the newspaper decided to call increased chances of diabetes. I mean, from eggs. I mean, it's an outright lie. Somebody paid for that. Somebody who was trying to get their share of the egg portion of the plate. They're trying to get the egg off the plate and get theirself on. So here's the question I have for you. Think about this. let's say your family suddenly got an exotic pet, and a pet that you'd never had before. You don't know what the damn thing eats. Do you think that that pet is going to be better off if you go to Harvard Medical School and look for all the research papers that were paid for by pet food manufacturers? Or do you think you're better off to watch David Attenborough doing a 2-hour special on that animal in the nature? Well, I think the second version is going to work a lot better. You're going to, oh, and here we've got the lion eating, you're going to hear exactly what they ate in their nature, how much they moved around. That's going to be a better indication. And what I suggest is that we use that same basic logic with our own selves, using our archaeological experience of our history and our present day capacity for observing hunter-gatherer tribes that are still living as close a representation to our ancestral lifestyles as we can find.
Oh, amen, brother. And, it makes sense because if you look at the state of the general population across at least, many countries like Australia and US and many others, we can certainly observe that there is a major healthcare crisis. And it's getting worse, and we can change it around. But it starts with us, and it starts by making those appropriate decisions. If you have a zoo with a bunch of animals that are unwell, you don't throw drugs in there. You look at their ecosystem. You look at what the animal, as in what we really do need. I want to ask you about the book. I know you've spent a lot of time with the Post-Diabetic book, Post-Diabetic program. Why did you create it, and how does it work? For those out there that think, okay, I might have to have a look at this, tell us a little bit about that, please.
It's actually kind of a cute story. It wasn't on purpose. What happened was that I've been teaching business for many, many years, and I really enjoy teaching business. And so my business clients would be often asking me for advice outside of the scope of normal business. Like, how do you run your family as an entrepreneur, or how do you deal with your fitness and your health? And so I started teaching what I had learned and sharing it with my business clients. And that got them asking, well, could you develop a program for us? So I did. So I created my first ever 90-day health coaching program, and I started offering it to clients. And it was so successful that I soon had to build a website because all these people's friends were going, how do I sign up? So I didn't mean for it to become a business. I didn't mean for that, but it's what happened. But what I also didn't mean for was for it to become the basically most effective system for weight loss on the planet. It was never meant to be that. And it was never meant to be about diabetes reversal. We didn't design it for that purpose. We designed it to simply help people change their conscious relationship with food and improve their eating patterns. But we started getting this one conversation on a regular basis. My doctor's a bit confused because 2 months ago, I was type 2 diabetic and now I'm not. And they don't really have a way in the system of reversing that step because it's not seen as reversible. They can't even change me back. And we kept having this. And my doctor says that I'm now pre-diabetic. And I'm like, no, you're not. You are not pre-diabetic. Well, the doctor says with an A1C in this range, I'm pre-diabetic. And I'm like, hold on. That may be where your A1C is right now. But I would argue that somebody who has an A1C that is trending toward type 2 diabetes is pre-diabetic, and somebody who has that same A1C, but they're trending in the other direction, they are post-diabetic. And I happened to make this comment once to Mark Hyman, a very famous American doctor and a good friend of mine, and he went, that's a really good idea. We should call it that. And what I would argue is that post-diabetic is a different medical condition from pre-diabetic, and as a consequence of the trend, it should require different medical advice. Somebody who is pre-diabetic may well require some kind of medication and pharmaceutical intervention, but somebody who's post-diabetic likely needs to be coming off their medication because they're headed the other way. Now, here's where it gets kind of interesting is that I get this, I find this Zoom meeting on my calendar one day, and it's a guy named Ruben Ruiz, MD. And the reason he's booked a Zoom meeting with me is he's telling me all about these car accidents he's had. And I'm like, I don't know why he's telling me about these car accidents, but 2 days in 1 week, he went to the same Starbucks, got himself a coffee, and still fell asleep behind the wheel of his car twice and got in these car accidents. And that's the point where he goes, and I'm a medical doctor. I'm 40 pounds overweight, type 2 diabetic, hypertensive, and on 10 prescription medications. And the reason I fell asleep behind the wheel of my car after drinking a Starbucks was I had no energy. And he says, but that night I went home with a total crisis of conscience. How can I be a doctor? I can't even heal myself. How can I be a doctor? Then he found one of my master classes and through my publisher, Mind Valley. And then he did our 90-day program. And he said that at the end of that 90-day program, he'd lost all 40 pounds. He had reversed his type 2 diabetic condition. He had reversed his hypertension and he got off 9 of his prescription medications. And he was blown away because never once in medical school, and by the way, not only did he run 3 medical clinics as a doctor, but he was an assistant professor of medicine at UCLA and a long-term internist. He is smart and has been educated. And during that education, nobody once told him that food had any relationship to these things or that they were reversible. And so he approached me and said, we got to get your message out into the world. So we co-wrote this book together, and there it is. Post-Diabetic came out just about 4 days ago.
Check this out, guys. If this is interesting for you, and I can speak from experience, if the doctors of the future don't really learn about nutrition and the things that we've discussed, there will be no such things as doctors. As I say, there is a huge difference between sick care and healthcare. What we call healthcare is not healthcare. It's sick care. Because you don't go to the doctor, you don't go to the hospital unless you are sick. And again, you can have heart disease, cancer, and diabetes at the same time and absolutely feel no symptom or not be aware that there are symptoms. So again, take action and put your health first because you are worth it. You deserve to lose the weight that you want to lose or gain the weight that you want to gain. You deserve to have energy. You deserve to be alive and vibrant. That's what you're born to experience. So if this is resonating with you, check out these programs, check out the book, Post-Diabetic, again with Eric and also Ruben Ruiz, MD, and learn more about how to manage this sort of stuff. I've got a couple of websites here. We've got Facebook, it's Eric Edmeades, straight in one word. We've got Twitter, same thing. Instagram, Eric Edmeades, LinkedIn, etc., etc. And where do people go to get the book? Where can we find the book, Eric?
Probably the easiest place for most people is to go to Amazon. I mean, it's available. It's published by Hay House, so it's basically available at any online retailer you want. And probably it'll start showing up in some retail locations. So Amazon might be the best place. You can also go to postdiabetes.com. And at postdiabetes.com, you can definitely order it directly from us. And that's also one of the things that we did with this book was we included for free enrollment in one of our post-diabetic training programs. So there's a video-based training program that would normally be about, I think it's $247. And if you buy the book, you can enroll in that program as our guest for free. And I do want to say this, it's actually really important. In titling this book, we really thought a lot about that. And the good news is the title breaks a new concept, post-diabetic, and it makes people think. But there's another problem, and that is that most people don't think diabetes is that big a deal. And many of them are on the diabetic spectrum and they just don't even know it yet. So people should be reading this book also from the perspective of prevention. When you consider that in 1970, you had to be over 40 years old to get type 2 diabetes. Now there are teenagers with it. You're dealing with 1 in 3 American teenagers are pre-diabetic and 7 out of 10 Americans are on that spectrum somewhere. So you might be on that spectrum and you don't even know. And so the first half of the book is really going to walk you through what diabetes is and how you can begin to recognize it and how your lifestyle might be taking you in that direction. And the second half of the book guides you through a step-by-step process for reversing it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. I've got one last question for you straight off the cuff. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. It goes like this. I want you to imagine, Eric, that you are on the world stage. Every sentient being alive has gathered and they're fully present to hear your message. When you're ready, take a breath, share. What is your message to the world right now?
We all live with way too much fear and anxiety and worry about what may happen. And I want you to imagine that the vast majority of things that you've worried about or that you've had anxiety about either didn't happen at all or happened and served you. And so if you recognize that to be true, then you should just let go and live your life like the game that it's supposed to be. You should really aim to enjoy every aspect of it, especially the difficult aspects. Teenagers understand this when they're playing video games. They play a video game, and when they get to the tough part, the end of the level where they have to face the big boss or the final part, they don't recoil in fear from that. They stand up, they take a breath, and they play through that level, and they know something. They almost don't even want to pass it easily the first time because they know the harder it is to pass that level, the more emotionally rewarding it's going to be when they do. If we applied that principle to our lives, I think about it this way. Imagine, Espen, do me a favor, fire me. I'm your employee, fire me.
Okay. The way you've been behaving, Eric, not okay. You're fired.
Oh, Espen, thank you so much. I got to tell you, what a gift you've given me. I mean, look, you and I both know I've been thinking of quitting. You've been thinking about firing me. We've been living with all this uncertainty. You're stressing, I'm stressing. And for the first time in weeks, the stress is gone. You finally did it. And you know what? I totally deserved it. Even now, I could probably turn things around because I know what was wrong, but I probably needed this firing to create whatever magnificent things are coming in my future. So I just want to say thank you. Now, I think that person probably gets rehired on the spot, but more to the point, that's how I would want everybody to try and approach their lives, is remember that the vast majority of the things that you worried about, that you were fearful of, that you had anxiety about, either didn't happen or in the long term, they ended up serving you. So why not just live with faith?
Beautiful. Eric Edmeades, everybody, thank you so much for your time. If this has been useful, please do take the time to share this with your loved ones. If you know someone that needs to improve their health, this could be the thing that changes that around for them. So please share this with as many people as you can and help Eric get his message out to more people like I will as well. Thank you so much once again for your time. Really appreciate it, buddy.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.